Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and welcome to part 4 of your series Unlocking the Giza Plateau, the Ancient Science of Astronomy, Geometry and Metrology of the Pyramids. And previous episodes we started moving away from Giza and showing how the same plan can be applied in faraway places based again on the solstice, equinox and summer solstice, especially the Egyptian New Year, which marked the season of the flood. And this is a key theme that, for instance, the Giza Plateau from the 0 point was an observatory and a calendar, and that this calendar ran the entire length of the Nile being, and the whole Egyptian culture from prehistory being utterly dependent on the Nile and the flood cycle, and how the geometry of the pyramids itself, not just at the summer solstice sets between Khafre and the Great Pyramid, creating the Archet symbol being the emblem of the Archets of the flood cycle, the inundation cycle, but that the same pattern and alignments were happening far away in Thebes, for instance, the Valley of the Kings, places such as Luxor Temple, Ramesseum, Karnak Temple, and of course those wonderful tombs there. So all of Egypt, Thebes included, not just Lower Egypt where the delta was, everything was dependent on the Nile. And so, for instance, here at Thebes, the Colossi of Memnon, we get an idea of the flood impact and how the reason why these temples were walled and the flood protection, they would create the Ben mound, they would stay unflooded while the walls were maintained in the past. And it's another reason why you have pyramidal walls in, so again, the length and breadth of the Nile. Also the importance of mounds, whether it's in along the ancient cultures, along the Danube, along the Mississippi, along the main rivers of China or India. The annual flood cycle was a human constant, and since the population explosion, the mass agriculture, the damming of rivers, this inherent human cycle has been lost, and it defined not just Egypt but all cultures of the ancient world. For instance, in the Book of the Dead, in spell 25, one of essentially the 10 Commandments, it says, "I have not dammed the rivers" as well. So they understood the importance. It's literally in the text that you don't dam the rivers, and this is important. So the Egyptian New Year symbol, that represents time, and we see again just the Archet with the sun going down between two mountains. Utterly fundamental to understanding ancient Egypt, and even up prior to 1970. So still when after photography was invented, this flood cycle was the heartbeat of Egypt. The Nile is the spine. So when we're at Thebes, we're looking, so that Giza Plateau, on the summer solstice, the sun sets in the middle, you would see the silhouettes of there. So you would see the Khafre Pyramid in profile from the 0 point, you would see the corner of the Great Pyramid, and there we get these angles and these important proportions. So across Thebes, not only was the summer solstice alignment, now 28 degrees, that angle would point to the summer solstice sunset. The opposite direction, it would point to the winter solstice sunrise. Sunrise, sunset, it's essentially the same element, but throughout previous episode, links in the description, but what we found was the temples themselves were aligned to these angles, especially connected to the Khafre's pyramid, but also we saw evidence of that same pattern, that this 42-degree angle linked in there as well. Now in the Osirion and Temple of Seti I, another one of these major places, major site, so much information there, more to come on that, but that alignment was again repeated in the Osirion Seti I temple as well. These being very core units that are repeated in the temples across Egypt, but I believe that they were first brought in architecturally speaking at the Giza Plateau, and that was transferred from Heliopolis, the ancient house of life, where Sheshet, the mistress of the books, the inventor of writing, the keeper of royal records, that was her primary sanctuary. And in future episodes we'll look at the design of Heliopolis and see, well, it's clearly, and even the way that the pyramids are all aligned to Heliopolis, the references to Heliopolis in the pyramid text, the coffin text in the Book of the Dead, it's quite architecturally, astronomically, and through the texts themselves, it's evident. But what we saw was this repeated pattern, Abydos and Thebes, for instance, and this being repeated in the Khafre pyramid. So this 3, 4, 5 triangle and these angles there, and we saw it at the Giza Plateau. Now it's not just geometrically lovely in the way it connects to the Vesic Pisces and essentially musical information, but that angle of Khafre's pyramid also reflects the actual length of the season itself. That's the degrees that the sun would move across the sky from New Year's Day, 120 days later, marking the end of the flood season. A squared plus B squared equals C squared, 3, 4, 5 triangle, the first Pythagorean triplet. Also mentioned the definitional issue of you're counting from the solstice. Well, a solstice will last for 2 to 3 days, where the sun will appear to set in the same place. So maybe for 3 sunrises and 2 sunsets, or for 3 sunsets and 2 sunrises, therefore giving us the 360-day calendar. 180 days there, 180 days back, plus the 5 days of the winter and the summer solstice. Khafre's pyramid from the 0 point, seen in profile. From the 0 point we see Archeoastronomy with the sun setting between the 2 mounds, but also that 3, 4, 5 triangle can be found in the Great Pyramid itself. Now we're going to look, the Great Pyramid is essentially the gauge here. It contains the information. But in the King's Chamber we have a 3, 4, 5 triangle, the same angles again repeated, and so this all important site. Now the Great Pyramid I would say is the primary one, but when it comes to observing, Khafre's pyramid is the main point, because the summer solstice is over here and it would move across the sky and then it would eventually return. So the calendar using Khafre from the 0 point, which is right here on the corner, which follows the Khafre causeway, this is your observance, this is your calendar pyramid. So Thebes and Abydos, we saw that, of course, it's in Khafre's pyramid in the Giza temple itself. Now what about all these other pyramids? Is it there too? Well, no surprise, yes it is. And so let's begin with these. Amenemhat pyramid, Pepi I and Pepi II, Merenre, Teti I, Userkaf, and Merenre pyramid. And well, so let's jump into it. So all these lesser pyramids, well, they contain the same geometric information, and we'll get further into it because they're also aligned to Heliopolis, and I've got some new information on that too. So Pepi II, sorry, it's Pepi with an I. Should have fixed that typo, not Pepe. But it's 150 Egyptian royal cubits wide, and it's 100 Egyptian royal cubits high. A 3:2 ratio, therefore giving us 2, 3, 4, 5 triangles, exactly the same as the Khafre pyramid and Abydos and the temple alignments in Thebes. Merenre, 100 Egyptian royal cubits high and 150 Egyptian royal cubits wide, and it also contains pyramid text, very important, because the earliest pyramids, such as the Giza pyramids, no writing. The Siryn, no writing. Khafre Valley Temple, no writing. An important theme explored more in the future. Now, looking at that picture, you'd think, how did they get this height? Well, what we have is surviving casing stones. For instance, in Pepi I, 100 Egyptian royal cubits high originally and 150 Egyptian royal cubits wide. Because we can find the base, we know the proportions of the base, that leaves an imprint on the ground, and we have surviving casing stones. And this is some of the best preserved. So that's how these other pyramids, how we know that they are of that height, even though they would just appear to be a bunch of rubble. But in the rubble is information. Once you get the angle, once you have the footprint of the pyramid, you know what the original height, and you know, well, you can still measure the base. So 100 Egyptian royal cubits high, 150 wide at the base. Another example of these pyramid texts being stored inside Teti, we have 100 Egyptian rock cubits high, 150 Egyptian rock cubits wide again. These are all repeating the same very important astronomical geometric pattern linked to sites across Egypt. And of course we have pyramid texts as well. Now Userkaf, that's not 150 wide or higher. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact number, but it is at a 2 to 3 ratio, 3 wide, 2 high. Therefore, again, these 3, 4, 5 triangles and these all important angles. Again, casing stone surviving, Merenre pyramid, 100 Egyptian rock cubits high and 150 Egyptian rock cubits wide at the base. Honourable mention to Merenre pyramid, that's 100 Egyptian rock cubits wide. And again, with the surviving casing stones, we got the angle fit just a touch over 53, therefore the same 3, 4, 5 triangles. That is an unusual pyramid in that the entrance is to the east, not to the north. That's one of the, probably think about the only exception to the pyramids. Of course, it's in such a bad state that maybe the northern entrance has been lost. But at 100 Egyptian rock cubits wide, this is a standard unit of measurement. And a very sacred unit of measurement across ancient Egypt. And so we see, just like in Thebes, just like in Abydos, this is intentional. It's obvious it's intentional, and it has important connections to the flood. So 100 Egyptian rock cubits high, one chord is 100 Egyptian rock cubits, which was then divided into 10 smaller units. This very important feature relates back to one of the oldest surviving recorded ceremonies, the stretching of the cord ceremony, presided over by the goddess Shesset, who would assist the pharaoh in aligning the origins of a temple. She was the foremost of the builders, she was the goddess of surveying. All these temples, pyramids, linked to the goddess Shesset. And Thoth too, but Shesset and stretching the cord ceremony is the key in that instance. So Merenre is 100 Egyptian rock cubits wide. Stretching the cords, we have even on the Palermo stone, but this is one of the oldest depictions of it. And then up until the last days of Egypt, we have the stretching the cord ceremony. So from the oldest records, Shesset's even pre-dynastic, very, very old goddess, basically all but forgotten. And stretching the cord, well, one cord is 100 Egyptian rock cubits. She also talks about the movement of the stars. My eye is now fixed upon Mesketu, the Big Dipper, which points to your northern stars. God of timekeeping stands by me, the four corners of your temple. This is the origins of this arc. This is one of the most sacred. When you begin a temple, you need to survey it, and you need to survey it very accurately. Your foundations and your surveying will determine the accuracy of the building later. If you've got great foundations, you can build a bad building, you can build a good one, but the foundation must be strong. An Egyptian cord, 100 Egyptian rock cubits divided into 10 again, so this units of 10 and 100. Now all of these pyramids which have that inherent properties of a Khafre pyramid, 3 wide, 2 high, we'll examine more in the future, but as an example, just as one example, all of these other pyramids also give you the proportions to connect the ratios of others. So the red pyramid is 200 Egyptian raw cubits high, 2 cords, and it's 420 Egyptian raw cubits wide at the base. The Great Pyramid is 280 Egyptian raw cubits high, a 3:2 ratio. We'll examine this more, but the Merenre pyramid and the Khafre pyramid will give you your proportions to link all these other pyramids. Now the bent pyramid is 200 Egyptian raw cubits high again. Merenre pyramid on the southern and northern face, the east and western face are a little bit shorter, but the south and the north, it's 200 Egyptian raw cubits wide, or 2 Egyptian cords. So back to Giza and ready for the next part. Here we have this ancient observatory built on natural structures to begin with, and then it's been engineered and completed and brought to a mathematical, geometric metrological precision. We have Khafre's tomb, Merenre's pyramid, Khafre's pyramid, and Khufu, or the Great Pyramid. Here we see the aerial view, and via the 0 point, all the astronomy, metrology, geometry, arithmetic and science begins to come together. So Giulio Magli was published, and he pointed out this connection to Archet and the summer solstice, and of course the New Year hieroglyph as well, as I found. And well, it's very symbolic, and it's also very important to the entire culture, economy, the myth and legends all embedded in this. And the Khafre pyramid bisects that angle perfectly. 14, so pure west, 14 degrees above Khafre's causeway, 14 degrees where in between Khafre and the Great Pyramid. So then investigated, okay, winter solstice, let's just bring that angle down 28 degrees, and it touches the corner of Khenkaway's pyramid, and if we bisect it, it hits the face of the Menkaure pyramid. Now it's important to notice that both these bisectors hit the pyramid. The solstice, the equinox, and the winter solstice does not touch it. It passes by, but it is they're infinite lines, as where these lines have a clear termination point at pyramids. So from the 0 point to where it passes the corner, marking the winter solstice of Khenkaway's pyramid, there's a screenshot. You can test it yourself. You notice that it's 28 degrees south of true west, 314.16 meters. That's 600 Egyptian royal cubits. All those pyramids that are 150 wide by 100 high, they have a perimeter of 600 cubits, or 6 chords. From the 0 point to the Khafre pyramid, 1200 cubits, or pi times 200 meters, and again that's at 14 degrees north of west. It's a 1:2 ratio, and of course that those other pyramids, those containing the pyramid text, that standardized proportions and measures, also give you the base units to bring these together. So to the plateau, the 0 point, time, measuring time, we're measuring length and the geometry and the way all these work and blend together. So the 0 point, now we'll look at length, the Old Kingdom cubit, and well, what exactly is the Egyptian royal cubit of the very ancient Egyptian royal cubit? This is a screenshot of the J.H. Cole survey. It's essentially even references, compares it with Petri's measures. They're a fraction of an inch off from one another. More modern surveys using the best equipment have confirmed this. This might be dated, but they were surveying just as well, and you can compare this. And so we just find a map, and now an interesting, very, very interesting, actually, key point about the cubit is that it has a relationship to the allegedly modern English foot. Now the modern foot can be found in the ancient past in the Salamis stone, for instance, in ancient Greek architecture, but also the meter can be found in the ancient past. An Aegina foot was 333 millimeters, so 1 yard was a meter. The the foot that they used in Notre Dame Cathedral and Beauvais Cathedral, 3 feet or 1 yard is essentially a meter, to within fractions of a millimeter. So the history of a meter is, like most of those, especially some of those apparently, debunking sites and stuff, they have no idea actually of what, they don't understand metrology. They just, whenever they're generally ignorant to firstly the history of the modern meter and to the ancient past of that and the connections to pendulums. But a 1 meter wide diameter of 1 meter, therefore pi meters in circumference, that's the Egyptian royal cubit. Pi over 6 meters is 1 Egyptian royal cubit. We have surviving cubit rods. Now we can test this on the pyramid itself. You might notice that the north face is 20 centimeters shorter than the southern face. No one side of the pyramid is exactly the same. However, for instance, the Grand Gallery is 4 Egyptian royal cubits wide, with 1 cubit on each side for the bench and a stairway or pathway up 2 cubits wide. It's throughout the pyramid that the cubit was used, but it's just a matter of crunching the numbers, and we find if the pyramid is pi over 6 meters, each side is slightly off. For instance, the southern face is a touch over, however we can get an average. Modern survey equipment has shown this. The average is 439.96 Egyptian raw cubits at pi over 6 meters. That would be 0.52355 meters. What's the difference between precisely pi over 6 meters? Well, it's 40 microns. It's the thinnest of the thinnest human's hair is the difference. This is well above, well inside any acceptable margin of error in any other scientific, technical, engineering field, except for maybe the highest levels of aerospace. But even there, except for maybe some components, this would be essentially considered perfection. Now that geometry which gives you the hexagon to divide a meter up into 6 is found at the Osirion as well. This flower of life, you can actually find it in Sumer. It is also a very important symbol across time, across cultures, across the world, and it's one of the most inherent, beautiful, elementary beginning pieces of geometry. All begins with a vesica, 2 circles, equal size. The center of the second circle is on the edge of the first, and you keep building this up. It's literally prop 1, book 1 of Euclid's Elements on how to create an equilateral triangle. A hexagon is just 6 equilateral triangles wedged together. Schwaller de Lubitz, Temple of Man, he looked into meter. This would be worth investigating if you're interested, and he found the meter encoded in many sites in Egypt. Link in the description. Alan Green has done fantastic work, for instance, in the Great Pyramid, which has a 7:11 proportion. That's not the only 7:11 proportion pyramid. The inherent mathematical constants embedded there, pi, phi, Euler's number, square roots, Fibonacci, Brune's constant, so many elements, but also that these proportions lead to the foot-meter-cubit relationship. 1 meter plus 1 foot plus 1 Egyptian raw cubit equals 6 feet to within 1/3 of a millimeter. Now that margin of error is another important feature. I did a long series, and for instance the Salamis stone, which has the Doric, Ionic, Samian and the allegedly modern English foot on the stone, is the base length is the square root of 5 Egyptian raw cubits to 1/3 of a millimeter. But that's a bit too complex, I suppose, for the moment. I'll also link this. You can make these at home with that very simple geometry. For instance, so where does 1 meter come from? The original 1 meter was defined by a second. For instance, the original a 1 meter pendulum swung at no more than 30 degrees. That's an important angle because it will affect the timing. This is the basis of pendulum clocks and timekeeping. 30 degrees, 1 meter long pendulum will create 1 Egyptian raw cubit. Or E minus 1 feet equals Egyptian raw cubit. The meter, the second, the cubit are individually you might say, well, that's a coincidence, but well, you look at the greater scheme of things, and no, it's not. This capstone was found next to the Red Pyramid. It was 1 meter high, and it was 3 Egyptian royal cubits wide, or pi over 2 meters, and then someone come along and done that. Well, what can you say now? So back to the 0 point, and we'll look at the measurement and the connections in a much deeper sense, because there is no chance of coincidence in what I'm about to show. And if you connect it with the other elements, it really is. It's fantasy to say that it's pure coincidence. The Nile is mental illness. It's not a river in Egypt. So now we're on the plateau. The 0 point, northwest corner of Khafre Valley's temple. Right above this doorway, we see that the alignment has already begun inside the temple. More to come on in regards to that particular temple itself. And because of the angle of the photo, we see a little bit of this side face. So just for just for note, you wouldn't actually quite see that. That's just the angle of the photo. But of course, on the summer solstice, first day of Arket, the flood season, the Arket symbol literally is being described in there. Okay, so back to that capstone found next to the red pyramid before it was restored. 1 meter high, 11 wide by 7 high proportions, or 3 Egyptian raw cubits wide at the base, pi over 2 meters. Just like the Meidum pyramid, the Great Pyramid has this 11 wide, 7 high proportion. Ideally speaking, there are small deviations in there, and that they contain information, very, very important information. This is geometric, this is astronomical, and some mathematics which didn't exist according to most history for thousands of years after this. But the 0 point, we already begun, so mentioned earlier, 600 Egyptian royal cubits from the 0 point to the northwest corner of Khaway's tomb / pyramid. All these other pyramids have the same proportion of the Khafre pyramid, and Thebes and Abydos embed that in their floor plans, not just their above ground, but it's also embedded in the ground. And these highlighted in blue are all 150 Egyptian royal cubits wide on each base and 100 Egyptian royal cubits high, giving us a perimeter of 600 Egyptian royal cubits. There we have it. Now that's just the beginning. 1200 Egyptian royal cubits from the 0 point to touch the face of the Khafre pyramid. Just 1:2 ratio, which between these the angle is 42 degrees. Mentioned those in previous. Okay, so from the 0 point you see the Khafre pyramid in profile, but we see the Great Pyramid from the corner. There we have the 42-degree angle once more. Now let's consider pi, and a very contentious, well, so much to be said. I've posted in earlier series and gone into the details of this, but it's more of a dogma issue rather than a serious one, because you consider the engineering of the pyramid. So it's perfectly acceptable that, for instance, the later Greeks had a good understanding of pi, a very close approximate, but to suggest the Egyptians did, well, just look at the engineering that they've created here. Again, this is a dogma to the reluctance to accept these types of, and it's with a simple, you can create a compass to make a round wheel, and then you wrap a string around it. You can get a good approximate of pi in that way. And, well, let's not ramble. So Khafre's pyramid is 274 Egyptian royal cubits high, or it was. We can get the base and then we get the angles. And the Great Pyramid 280 Egyptian royal cubits high. That's a difference of 6 meters, 6 Egyptian royal cubits, or pi meters. 1 meter diameter circle, the circumference pi meters, or 6 Egyptian royal cubits. 1/100th of this distance, or 1/200th of this distance. Therefore, this is pi times 100 meters from the 0 point. This is pi times 200 meters from the 0 point to the Khafre pyramid. Now, the Grand Gallery ceiling is a bit shorter than the floor, but if you multiply the Grand Gallery ceiling times pi, you get the height of the pyramid. Coincidence? Each side of a pyramid, again, I'm just simplifying, but the 440 Egyptian royal cubits, and it's 280 high. Therefore, from the 0 point, you would see the maximum visible base of the pyramid. You can only see 2 sides unless you're flying above it. And that would be 880 Egyptian royal cubits, the height 280. 880 divided by 280 is 22 divided by 7, which is 3.142857. This was the what's his name now? The Eureka man. I forget now. His name's escaped me at the moment. Archimedes. He, using very simple geometry, got a very good approximate of pi, and it was used at 22/7. In engineering terms, if you were to use 22/7, you would have to be in error with your measurements in a noticeable way, you'd have to create a huge structure, much bigger than the pyramids. 22/7 is or 1.3428, which is in any practical essence, except for like really specific, is as good as gold. Tiny fraction off the actual number of pi. However, because of the variations in each side of a pyramid, if you account for these, that very good approximate of 99.95% essentially becomes 99.99%. But covered that in earlier videos, so let's just move on for that for the moment. Now what's interesting is that that's a proportion. Same as the Grand Gallery, this is a proportion of pi. On the outside is repeated on the inside, proportions of pi. Just like Vitruvius speaks that the proportion of a temple should be to its whole, to its smaller parts. Well, there are other elements in there as well, but I want to make this all about pi and measures for the moment. Now that proportion of pi, 880 divided by 280, well, 880 cubits minus 280 equals 600 Egyptian real cubits, or pi times 100 meters, that distance. Same distance, or multiply it by 2, we get that distance. Okay, so the height to the half base, 280 high, 220 half base, 280 minus 220, 60 Egyptian real cubits, pi times 10 meters. The measuring cord was divided into units of 10 Egyptian real cubits. So we can make, that's not a difficult thing using their technique of measurement. Now, the Grand Gallery, which is just here at, the King's Chamber, just next to the Grand Gallery, has a base width of 10 Egyptian real cubits and a length of 20 Egyptian real cubits. Now the Grand Gallery itself is 4 Egyptian real cubits wide, 1 cubit a bench on either side and 2 cubits in the middle. Okay, so 10 cubits by 20 cubits, therefore we have a perimeter of 60 Egyptian real cubits, pi times 10 meters. And of course, we have the 3, 4, 5 triangle using the original floor measurements. The floor has been changed there. The original one, we had a groove around the outside, so we have 2 measures, both of them very important. This is very beautiful maths are encoding here, and it's very simple. But now the inside volume of the sarcophagus and the outside volume is, they're doubling the cube, something else that are highly advanced mathematics which come, but anyway, the 3, 4, 5 triangle. So the 4 is equal to the length of it, therefore that's 25 and 15. 20 plus 15 plus 25 gives us 60 Egyptian real cubits again. Consider that. Now, so therefore it's 20 long and it's 10 wide, therefore it's a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 to 1 or 1 to 2. It's again, this is how they've done it. And of course we have that particular angle from the 3, 4, 5 triangle, which gives us the angle of Khafre pyramid, which gives us the angle which we can find across Thebes, also the inherent angle alignment that we find in Abydos, and of course with all these other pyramids too. And of course we have so many of those pyramids that are 100 by 150 wide, 600 Egyptian real cubits perimeter. Again, just 1/10. And again, the chord was 100 and it was divided into tenths. That's also the angle describing the flood season. Also the dry season would return another 120 days to bring us back. That's right there. 42, again, 42 degrees, the pyramid, the inherent proportions of it, the measurements of it, inside and out, repeated. The 3, 4, 5 triangle includes that same 60 units, which gives us the Great Pyramid, and also links to all those other less famous pyramids, and of course other ancient sites, and the inherent astronomy of this particular site. Now, of course, that was a 42-degree angle, 600 Egyptian real cubits to the corner of Khenkawe, 1200 Egyptian real cubits. The 1200 line from the 0 point is a finite line. It hits the pyramid. These others are infinite lines. I'll go more into that, but let's consider. Okay, so and that was a 42-degree angle. Now we do the same. So from the summer solstice, 42 degrees. That brings us a finite line to the Merenre pyramid. How far from Merenre pyramid to the 0 point? Well, it's 3,043 feet as best as I can. I've been trying to be as precise and use that original point. It's without super duper equipment and funding. This is to be that level of precision, very difficult. Even with the best equipment, it's very, very difficult to be this level of precision. However, that Great Pyramid will once again describe this length. So the pyramid itself, for instance, these surveys, they describe the pyramid. However, the pyramid is the gauge, it's the calendar, it's the observatory, but what we have in the pyramid is the paving stones. It's built not the socle or the paving stones of 55 centimeters, which is a lovely number. I've got into it because it's just extraordinary the way it converts and gives us geometric astronomical connections. But you also have what's called the sockets at the corner. So these are at the corner. Now this is the survey, again referencing Petri. The Royal Engineers did the same. And so for instance, from Q to P to S and to R, that square is the pyramid. But as it even says in the note, that the sockets here, which I've highlighted, have been grossly exaggerated, because from Q to P would be 756 feet or 230 meters, roughly speaking. Each socket would extend the pyramid by 2 feet or 60 centimeters. So again, they've specified it in these surveys. This is exaggerated. It's adding 2 feet. If you were to put it in proportion, you would bet, but the lines would be indiscernible really from the greater part of it. Also, if you think, just in case you're thinking, the sockets are not that large. That's an exaggeration of how far the sockets extend. They basically add 4 feet or 1 1/3 meter, 1 1/4 meter to the base length of each side of a pyramid. Now, using those measurements, for instance, this corner would be 1521.637 feet on average. All these surveys again are just slightly a little bit off, but the average. So therefore, the perimeter of the Great Pyramid, including the sockets, is 3,043.2 feet, using an average of these best available surveys. 3,043.2 feet is the perimeter of the Great Pyramid, including the sockets, and that is the distance from the 0 point to the Merenre pyramid. The pyramid is the gauge. You just unwrap the pyramid and you get that distance. We mentioned earlier the 600 Egyptian rock cubits. We find that in the pyramid. We find it in all these other pyramids, especially those containing the pyramid text, which have the same proportion as the Khafre pyramid. That's the 0 point marker and the measures. So it's not just about the astronomy of it, not just about the geometry of these particular angles. The measurement systems, which link to timekeeping via the second. The pyramid is proportioned to the size of the Earth at 86,400. If you look at the corners, if you look from the corner, you see the maximum visible base. Multiply that, if you include the sockets, by 86,400. You get the circumference equatorial of the Earth. The height of the pyramid, including the socket, the paving stones, multiply that by 86,400. You get the polar diameter of the Earth. 1 second, there are 86,400 seconds per day. A 1 meter pendulum, which defines the Egyptian royal cubit, gives you 86,400 seconds per day. Once you understand the 0 point marker, once you understand the metrology that the Egyptians were using, and so whether or not those relationships of the cubit are legitimate or not, let's just put that to the side for the moment. The Egyptian royal cubit is clear, and it defines all these structures, and there is a clear pattern, measurable, testable pattern. It's astronomical, it's metrological, and it's based in the proportions. So the 0 point, these relationships, the causeway of 0, so the line itself is south of that point, but that's the door. Directly above is your 0 point. If you want to start checking this for yourself, I'm restricted to using Google Earth. I wish I had access to much higher resolution much more accurate systems, but that's what it is for the moment. So the astronomy leads to this, the architecture leads to this, as we'll examine in future episodes, the texts lead to this as well. It's got to do with the seasons and astronomy, and of course the metrology. We don't have a nice bound book telling us this, but what we do have is the Giza complex. The individual pyramids tell us this, Abydos and Thebes and all the other pyramids along the Nile down to the Meidum pyramid are repeating the same thing. These are the books. They preserved this knowledge in stone for eternity, or at least till thousands and thousands and thousands of years, assuming no one would, the destruction doesn't continue. How would you best preserve knowledge? Anyone who lived a generation would notice that the papyrus that they saw as a boy is now degrading. If you write it on copper tablets, they get crushed over time. How do you preserve knowledge? You preserve it in stone like this. In one short generation, the meaning of words has changed just in my lifetime. In the last 2 years, I've seen words change in a remarkable amount of, language even in a generation evolves and changes. So if you write it down in a text, even if they can read the text, whether they would translate it correctly, probably not going to happen. But if you write it in geometry, you write it in proportions, and you have a measuring system which is built into the pyramid itself. So the base and the height of a pyramid cubits, but in and outside the cubits are repeated. So even if all the cubit rods are lost, the building itself will tell you the proportions of it. This is again an ancient practice described very elegantly in the 10 books of architecture by Vitruvius. So from the 0 point we draw this circle, we have corners that are equidistant. Again, I would love to have access to better equipment, but again, have a look for yourself. This circle from the 0 point would also seem to pass directly through the center of the Great Pyramid. I cannot measure it to the precision I would love to. The blue circle joins the corners as well. And now we have a parallel causeway. This is a very important angle which we'll find in other places in future episodes. So there's the essential plan, and I've marked the centers of the pyramid as best I could with the available technology. And I'd like to, thanks to Larry from A.I.P, he's for instance sent me this diagram. There have been many efforts to find the inherent geometry of the Giza Plateau, and what you'll find is that they're actually complementary to what I'm proposing. So I've overlaid it there, and if you make it transparent, I've overlaid it. Now you notice that there is a tendency to focus it on the Sphinx. However, if you just extend the lines, we find they focus on the 0 point once again. So this geometry is actually complementary to what I'm saying, but only from the 0 point does that happen. This is a screenshot from Revelations of the Pyramid, and now looking at an alternate center point. So the center of the Great Pyramid, the center line of the Khafre Pyramid, and then built from there, also joining the corners of the Great Pyramid and Menkaure. Well, again, passing over the Sphinx, but it passes over the 0 point once more. The 0 point. So looking at the angle, 321.84, so from the 0 point to the center of the Great Pyramid, that's 38.16 from. Now that line is, well, 37.77, ever so close to, again, that's 1/4 of a degree from what I would say is the ideal angle, but that's well within the margins of, again, the technology that I'm limited to. And so from that center to there to the 0 point, it's the Great Pyramid. I would say that there is something here based on the experience I've had through examining the Washington. I would propose that there was or is something here, and here we have the Wall of the Crow. Just to the south there of the Wall of a Crow was the workers' village. Joanna Fletcher, for instance, but of course others have done fantastic work. They're looking into the minutiae of the daily life. So there are barracks there. They looked into counting the bones of the beef and the fish and the pigs, and getting an idea of the scale of the operation that was happening in there. The outlines of the workshops. These were just south to the Wall of the Crow. So just like Deir el Medina in Thebes, this would have been where the professional class who knew the secrets, the stonemasons and the skilled people, this is where they were working from, just south of the Wall of the Crow. So it's in this region here. You can still see traces of it after some recent excavations. This is where the people working on it lived. The Wall of the Crow formed the boundary into the sacred precinct. You would have to pass through the door just here, which is now a Coptic Islamic graveyard here, and only part of the Wall of the Crow survives. And then from the Wall of the Crow you go north, and now you're in the sacred temple precinct. And now there's a car park for all the buses and tourists. And long before this happened, but I would assume that there was something in this area, and important, not magnificently huge, but probably a very important temple. Now, from the Wall of the Crow, we also have back to Kent-Kaue's tomb, and it is tilted. So all the pyramids are aligned to the cardinal points, but Kent-Kaue's tomb is tilted. And by extending that line, it seems to the very entrance of the Great Pyramid itself. It doesn't hit the middle on the southern face, but it does hit the middle on the northern face, and that's the double chevron water symbol as well. So Kent-Kaue's tomb, the red line, would point to the center of the Great Pyramid, while the blue line runs parallel with the Wall of the Crow at 6 degrees. Thereabouts. Again, very, very hard to get to that level of precision. Now, what's interesting is that 6 degrees I found very important in modern architecture and town planning, also in ancient sites as the Menga and Vieira Dolmen. They're also got a 6 degree separation, and the people studying that have noticed that, pointed out this is a common feature in the ancient world. This is not exclusive to these places. So what's important about 6 degrees? Well, Great Pyramid, the peak of the relieving chambers is 6 degrees from the peak of the building itself. And it's actually 6.09009 degrees, but that would create if it's 2 and 19, Pythagorean triangle, the square root of that, the hypotenuse, would be the square root of 365. Therefore we have 84 degrees going off from there. Bisect that, we get 42. We get the angle of the pyramid. Once more, there is a geometric, metrological, mathematical, astronomical code that has been preserved in this structure, has been preserved across all of Egypt, and in later temples, where it's Hindus, the Buddhist temples, later architecture in cathedral buildings, in the early mosques designs as well. Of course, Greco-Roman Parthenon, the stone circles, the alignments in Karnak, for instance, all incorporate this very important knowledge, and it's just generally considered a coincidence because it's just assumed that they didn't have math, they didn't have geometry. Well, I would say that they did, and they had a very exquisite understanding of it because they wanted to study the stars. They wanted to understand their natural cycles. It doesn't take a computer. Now, we're so reliant on calculators and computers, but people were very clever in the past, and they could do a lot with a little. And these mathematical geometric rules also have a religious context because they, for someone so inclined, it's showing what the rules of nature are, and therefore what the rules of the Creator has put in place. So it's not just an academic exercise for the philosophers, Pythagoras and Plato, who were very interested also in spiritual elements. They were primarily geometricians and mathematicians, and that's why Plato's Republic is so important. He wasn't just a beret-wearing philosopher. He extracted his philosophy from rules of nature. He was a geometrician who was initiated at Heliopolis in Egypt. there is like weights and measures, math, geometry is just considered so bland and like boring, and it's just, we imagine now it's purely technological for boffins in lab coats in some restricted base. But in the past, the Greeks, the Romans, all these math was also a game to them. The early gematria, they would, names and words were math riddles, and they would play games with, like, yes, there is more than just the purely scholarly academic elements to this. These particular geometries and numbers have an ancient past, and it's really our modern bias to look at the people of the past as silly and well, no, we've actually lost information. Like, yeah, a trucker's hitch is now considered anti-gravity technology, for God's sake. So Sacred Geometry Decoded on PayPal. Thank you for watching. That link will be in the description if you'd like to support this channel. I'm now only starting to get into it. There is so much more. It's not just the architecture of the astronomy. It's also written in the text. If you care to read the ancient text through a geometric, astronomical, mathematical, natural cycles way instead of the mainstream view of both the alternate and the establishment in terms of view of history. If you look at it in a multidiscipline sense, if you apply it across rather than focus on one, if you apply it across the length and breadth of Egypt, you're going to find the same things again, and it can be measured, it can be tested, and it just simply is. So anyway, with that, hope you enjoyed and have a good one.